Hi, this is Tangents, the new podcast from Coin Center. I'm Robin Weisman, the lobbyist of the group, and today I am very pleased to be able to welcome Mark Murphy, who's the Chief Operating Officer at Digital Currency Group, as my guest while we talk about life-work balance. Mark, welcome.
Thank you for having me, and I'm glad we're not talking about the Howey test or the merits of the Token Taxonomy Act today.
Oh, I didn't tell you that that's also part of life-work balance.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought it might be great for you to just start off talking a little bit about your role at Digital Currency Group and what it is you do on a daily basis.
So I'm the COO of DCG, and for those of you who aren't aware, DCG is the most active investor in the blockchain space. We have equity investments in over 160 companies located in 30 countries around the world. That's probably what we're most well known for. But we also own and operate three wholly owned subsidiaries. Grayscale, which is the largest digital currency asset manager. You've probably read some about Grayscale. They now have over $4 billion in assets under management. Genesis, which just launched their prime broker business. Genesis is the most prolific over-the-counter trading firm and lending firm in the space. They just recently purchased a custodian and now have entered the prime brokerage race. And the third wholly owned sub is CoinDesk, which is probably the most well-known media and events company in the industry. So those three companies are our public wholly owned subsidiaries. We may have another one coming down the pike as well.
Do you want to break any news here?
No, not breaking news here, but
Okay.
I would say probably 80 to 90% of my time is spent with the leadership teams of the subsidiaries, helping them run their business every day, hitting their goals and objectives, pushing them when need be, but working in a collaborative fashion to see them achieve their goals. And it's an incredibly fun job. I get to work with a lot of immensely talented people, and it's fun to work with Barry again.
That's amazing. Well, you do have a great job. And part of the reason that I wanted to have you on the podcast today is to talk about how particularly you came to this job, because you and I had an opportunity about a year ago to have a conversation about life-work balance. That's where I learned that we shared this passion for achieving a balance in our lives where we find a place for work, but we're honoring our commitment to our family and what we want to be doing. And I think it's something that as I came to it over my 27 years of working so far, it wasn't something that people really talked about. And in fact, early in my career, it was something that wasn't really part of the conversation at all. So the fact that we share different journeys to a similar end was very interesting. And I thought we could talk about that today. So I don't know if you want to share a little bit about what it was that brought you to the decision to work at Digital Currency Group. And it might be helpful to talk a little bit about that and how your pursuit of life-work balance also was part of your decision to join the group.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such an important topic, and people really don't talk about it all that often. It's hard, particularly when you're ambitious and you're working hard and you're trying to build your career. It sometimes falls by the wayside, and there are lots of important reasons why it shouldn't, but oftentimes it gets deprioritized. I think my career, like you, I've changed careers. I spent my first 7 years of my career as a lawyer in New York, and my wife and I had gotten married right after law school. She was also a lawyer, and we put off having children for a while, and we just worked. I mean, we were in our 20s and then into our early 30s, and they were really long weeks, long hours of the day. And it was just expected, like this was what you did when you work at a law firm in New York. And
was your wife also working at a law firm at the time?
Yes, she was. She was at one of the biggest firms in the city, and we were working really long hours, but it was okay. We didn't have kids. We still made time for each other. But the emphasis was definitely on our careers. And after 7 years or so, I decided I didn't want to be a lawyer anymore. not because of the work-life balance, but just because I didn't enjoy being a lawyer.
I don't know what you're
And
talking about.
yeah, exactly. So I started doing public affairs work, communications, public policy stuff, with Barry Silbert at his first company, Second Market. And that was when I was first introduced to the concept of company culture in a tangible way. Um, I had always thought it was mostly bullshit and that it didn't really matter in the course of actually doing your day to day. But what I found at Second Market was that I really liked the people I worked with. The camaraderie was great. We worked hard, but it's always interesting when you're at a smaller company because I think you feel the wins and losses more viscerally than you
Right
do
there.
when you're
It's personal to you.
personal. Exactly. And I spent 5 years of my career at Second Market, and you would think that I would have left there with the idea that like company culture is important and it should be the focal point. But really, it wasn't. What I was interested in was more. I wanted, more money, bigger job, more
Yes.
pressure, and I associated that with personal success. I associated professional advancement with my own personal success. And so when you and I talked about it last year, and this was at the DCG Founders Summit in Arizona, which is when we bring together the founders and CEOs of all of our portfolio companies, as well as some great industry participants such as you and Jerry.
Super lucky to be included in that group.
It's a great group. It's really, and it's awesome because we don't talk about crypto the whole time.
Right.
There are other experts that come in and speak, and the breakout sessions I find to be the most gratifying because you get to have these kinds of conversations that you just don't normally have in your day to day. So anyway, with the story I told you at that time, which I think resonated with you, is that my last company I was working for, and I was there for almost 4 years. It was a big company. It was a pretty big job, but the culture was just abysmal. And it was, I was working primarily for bankers, and it was really old school, suit and tie kind of vibe. And there were a bunch of situations that sort of popped up that I wish I would have had I don't know if it's the confidence or what it was, but I wish I would have understood like, oh, this isn't right. And this is not what I should want in my career. And the thing that I always reflect back on is a bit of a turning point for me was on my daughter's 8th birthday. My wife and I took her and her friends to a movie, a matinee, and it was on a Sunday.
Weekend?
It was on a Sunday, and we had a call. Some of the folks in leadership had set up a call at 8 a.m. that Sunday, and that was pretty normal. It was the kind of place that we did calls over 3-day holiday weekends. It was that kind of place. And so we did this call, but one of the senior people who was supposed to be on didn't show up. So we still did our call. We were on for an hour. It was fine. I wasn't doing anything. It was 8 a.m. on Sunday. I take my daughter to the movies, and as I'm going in to sit down to the movies, I get a text from one of my colleagues saying, well, the guy that blew off the call at 8 a.m. wants to talk now. So, no regard for what we were doing on Sundays with our families. And so I stepped out of the movie. I took the call. It went an hour and a half. I walked back into the movie theater and sat down, and the credits started rolling. And I just remember thinking, like, I felt terrible because I never wanted to be that kind of dad. My dad wasn't that kind of dad. And my daughter was fine. She wasn't even really aware of it, but I was aware of it. And yet even that moment didn't tell me that I needed a new job. And when I look back, it was a significant event, but at the time I was just like, man, I can't believe I missed my daughter's, essentially her birthday party. And I felt terrible about it, but I still didn't change. Even that event didn't make me change jobs.
Right, which is in and of itself a little crazy.
It is. And so like for me, it was one of those things where it was going to take something dramatic and drastic for me to change.
I just want to interrupt you for 1 second to ask a question. Yeah. At that point, were you ever like at night having conversations with yourself or with your wife that were along the lines of, I don't really know if this is working for us. I don't know if it's working for me. Was your head there, or were you just so in what you were in that you, like you just said, no big deal at 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning that I was doing a call because I wasn't doing anything else, like sleeping
Yeah.
or reading or exercising.
Right, right. It's I was definitely I would definitely say things about like, oh God, we have to have another Sunday morning call and like complain a little bit about it. But I don't know, I saw it as some sort of like test where I wanted to prove that it wasn't going to break me and that I was strong and tough and resilient. And the reality is there was no reward at the end. There never was going to be. I mean, yes, I was well paid and that was nice, but there was no. I felt like I was striving towards something that wasn't ever going to be attainable. And so, yes, I had some of those conversations. Like I would talk about it with my wife, and some of our colleagues would commiserate about it as well. But it wasn't enough to actually force me into action. Like I wasn't looking for other jobs. I didn't think, yeah, this is messed up. I viewed it as a stepping stone to something bigger and better. But the things that I was thinking about as being bigger and better were just, it was a bigger brand, more money. It wasn't things that were going to actually make me personally happy.
So what was the thing?
Well, this is now 3 years ago. I The long and short of it is that I was running communications, and there was a communication that went that was a press release for a deal that was put onto our website accidentally. The deal was supposed to have closed and it hadn't, and we pulled it from the wire service, but there was some guy somewhere who didn't work for me who had automated the press release to go on the website. And when a press release goes on the website, there are web crawlers that find it, and it's bad. It's certainly, for a communications person, it's a bit of a nightmare. But I also knew, and I was the kind of person like I'm really big on personal accountability. I said, listen, I was running external communications, so it's on me to make sure that things don't go out externally that aren't supposed to. But the reaction was pretty severe. I mean, my boss was essentially fired. I was put on paid probation or something like that, which is a weird thing. And in the span of a couple hours, I went from being, I'd kind of been like I don't know, I wouldn't say I was a rising star at the company, but I had been promoted, and I was.
I'm going to interrupt you to say I bet you were a rising star at the company.
Well, thank you. I certainly felt like I was in a good place, and 2 hours after all this went down, I was essentially out. I was put on probation, and a week later I negotiated a buyout, and I left the company. Honestly, fairly amicably, even though it was the way it went down. That day was the day I was essentially fired, forced out. Was personally humiliating and embarrassing. And when you work at a company, it was a big company. A lot of people knew about it. It wasn't like it wasn't like a layoff. I was singled out with one other person, and it was so troubling to me that I could be so easily discarded, but it was a good reminder also of that we're all, no one is indispensable. Even if you're great at your job, the train just keeps moving with or without you. And the day after it happened, like I said, that day was awful. But the day after it happened, my wife said to me, right when I woke up in the morning, she said, "How do you feel?" And I said, "Honestly, I feel good." I felt like a release of stress and anxiety. And it was so jarring to me that I felt that way. Like I really was in a good, like 36 hours later, I was in a good place. And what it told me was that I was just I needed this. I was doing it wrong. There was an opportunity to reassess my priorities, to put my kids first and foremost in my decision making.
Yeah.
And it was a reminder that like life is just too short to work with assholes. You need to like and respect the people that you work with. And like you, Robin, with your team, like when I watch you and Jerry and the team interacting, it's so obvious that you guys genuinely like one another. I feel the same way about DCG. I mean, we have built, it's a great company. I'm incredibly proud of the financial success. Barry's a visionary and has laid out a great roadmap, and it's up to the rest of us to execute on it. But what I'm most proud of is the team around me. It's just a really strong group of people, and we genuinely care about each other. And to me, you know, we talk about work-life balance. I almost don't like that expression because balance connotes something of equal value. It's more, my wife uses the expression work-life integration, so I'm going to attribute it to her.
It's a good
Because
one.
it's not always, I work a lot. I work a lot of hours, but I prioritize my family. And if that means going to my daughter's lacrosse game and then putting in a few hours at night after when the kids go to bed, then so be it. But
Right.
what I'm not going to do anymore is miss the things that are most important to me for my job. And
I think that
that's the
is
difference.
amazing. That is amazing. And I think that actually brings me to something I think about a lot, but it's also interesting that, thank you for noting that at Coin Center, I think we have a really good thing going, and that we all respect each other. And that's because we think of each other as family. So and I know that at DCG, you guys call yourselves the DCG family. And I don't think it's a coincidence that both places have such a great, and I'm going to call it life-work balance, not work-life balance, that both places have such a great life-work balance because we think of our work as an extension of our family. And I
Yeah,
wonder if, and that's something I give a lot of thought to, that as I've gone from being a lawyer, also working in a law firm, working in-house at a big company, and then eventually actually taking 3 years off to be with my family, to hit the reset button, and then building work back in, I think a lot about how in the process of doing that, it's no longer really like work and life. It's more like work becomes just part of your life. Like if I had a third child, that child would be cryptocurrency. So I think of it as, it's just part of my day. It's not, and I
right.
don't know if you, and it sounds like you might think of it the same way. So instead of thinking of it in terms of work hours and home hours, it's more like there's just a day, and there's
That's
everything
right.
you want to get accomplished in that day. And how you make sure that balance happens is part of the ongoing, I guess, I don't want to call it, it's not a struggle, but it's the ongoing effort to make sure that you're doing the things that you want to be doing for your family and for your career and for the company that you're part of building and working for and with.
It's even become more acute with COVID, right? I mean,
Right.
without having, you know, commuting was, I live outside of New York City. I take the train, I take the Long Island Railroad into Penn Station every day, and then I walk to the office. It's an hour and 10 minutes or so door to door. It's a huge amount of time in the morning. And now with, with working from home, I mix my work and home life like all day. You know, like after we're done here, I'm gonna walk the dog and get some lunch and check in with the kids, and
Right.
you know, in a way that I wouldn't do it if I was in the office. But I also think it is, you have to have a culture that intentionally emphasizes these things. Everybody says they want to promote good work-life balance. There's no job that's going to be like, listen, you're going to be working your ass off all the time. Forget about seeing your family. Nobody recruits that way. But it really has to come from the top. And for me, you know, Barry is similar to me in that he and I have been friends a long time. When we first moved to New York, he worked as a banker and I worked as a lawyer. We almost never saw each other because we were both working really long hours. But he's also come to realize the importance of emphasizing family and emphasizing people's personal time, and that it actually makes you more productive. It makes you a better worker. It makes you more authentic. It makes you bring, you know, people use the expression bring your whole self to work. That's true. Like if you feel like your coworkers and your boss and the culture of the place has your back, it allows you to just be more comfortable in your own skin. And you know, that's not something I think about much at like this point in my career. But if you're a young person coming out of college, like that matters. Like to be able to feel like I'm adding value. I can suggest ideas. I'm not going to shoot things down. It's not very hierarchical. And we're kind of all in this together. That like, it's a little bit of a hokey notion, but it matters. And it does foster kind of environment and a culture that people feel like they can prioritize their family life, prioritize other things in their lives. And like you, Robin, you're a great example, because I do think, I mean, I'm so fortunate to be able to like just take a step back and observe my employment situation, and like getting fired from my job was not something that I viewed as like a killer for my career. But a lot of times, particularly for women, it's really hard to have this balance. You know, there's an unfair expectation on working mothers in this country where we expect women to do everything. And I just I like to think I am a good partner to my wife, but I still think she does more than I do. And
She probably does.
she does.
I don't know her, but she probably does. Yeah.
And you know, it's hard, like for you to willingly leave the workforce, focus on raising your children, and then come back with a job that is, you know, like you're on all the time.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I
really,
appreciate that.
No, it's really admirable. It is.
Thanks, Mark. Well, I think that actually what you were just talking about before brings me to a couple of other thoughts that I wanted to touch on with you. One of which is, you and I started our careers both in work situations that were very much all work, like 2,100 hours a year in a law firm, not including pro bono and non-billable time. That's no joke. But it was also what built us as professionals, and what I think probably instilled in us a certain work ethic. And then we had these journeys which were a little different. I wasn't, like you mentioned, I'm not going to say you were fired, but I wasn't forced to leave my job not of my own volition. But we both did, and we both took a minute to reset. But thinking about people that are entering the workforce now, life is really different now. There are technologies available, even forget COVID. Let's put COVID aside for a second, because we should talk about that. But even forgetting COVID, when I entered the workforce, when I was in a law firm, I didn't have even a BlackBerry. I remember when BlackBerries came out, and it was a big deal that only the partners in the firm got BlackBerries and not the associates. So I think that at least
by the way, I remember getting my first BlackBerry too.
Yeah, and then when I did, it was like, oh my God, I've really arrived. Little did I know that it was going to be like, at first I thought it was going to be like the ankle bracelet that was going to just absolutely kill me, because I was working in a law firm, and it did mean that was just more hours that I could work. I just didn't have to be there, but I always had to be available for the 8 a.m. Sunday phone call, because I now knew it was going to happen because of BlackBerry. But eventually I began to learn that technology was the thing that could free me to not have to be in one place. And then the workforce caught up. So we have this ability to see things evolve and to sort of pivot in our career decisions, and frankly, be very lucky to have the opportunities we had to be able to make the decisions that we've made that have led us to this great life-work balance, or work-life balance. But how do you think that this goes for people that are entering the workforce now? Do you think that people that are coming out of school and entering their first job, do you think they're coming in already thinking, I'm looking at my parents, or I'm looking at how other people work, and I want to have a life where I have a lot of separation, or I don't have as much separation between work and life? Or do you think that they're going to have to learn those lessons the same hard way that we did?
I think every situation is different, but you do ultimately, or a lot of it is going to be learned on the job. I mean, but I also think young people, younger professionals today are more willing to speak their minds, and they're more willing to question why things are done a certain way. You know, when I think about like my parents' generation, like my dad changed jobs, I think twice his entire career. Like it was, you went someplace after school, you worked there a long time, you know, maybe you had a pension, whatever. Like our generation is really the first where it's like, okay, they're not going to take care of me forever. And it's really up to me to figure things out and try to like advance my career on my terms. I think younger people are just like more used to the notion of not being in one place for a long period of time. They move around and travel a lot more. So in some respects, I think they're going to be better conditioned for the modern workplace than we were. Like it was more of a real adjustment, I think, for me anyway. I just had been like my early years, like yours, where you had to work hard. Everybody worked hard. Like you had to do it. It was the only way to advance in your career. And people should still want to work hard. I'm not advocating for being like a slacker, but there's different ways to do it. You don't have to be physically in the office. I mean, I've been really impressed with my colleagues at DCG and our subsidiaries. We had our best 2 quarters. Our best quarter ever was the second quarter. Our best quarter before that was the first. So it really, and that would surprise me, just because I didn't think people could be quite as productive as they could be in the office. But I was proven wrong. I mean, I think our preconceived notions about how work has to operate and what is required for somebody who's coming up, they're not necessarily that valid. So I think people who are entering the workforce now have just a better understanding of that, and they may adjust better, but it doesn't mean they're not going to have those moments where they think to themselves, "Wait, why am I doing this? Like, what's really most important to me?"
Right.
And that's a different conversation. It also depends on where one is in their career, right? It's different when you have a family than when you don't. But I do think they're better equipped today to handle it.
I think it's important to continue to highlight these issues. I know that you are very good about talking to your team about them. I know that I'm very open about talking to them. I think that it has represented a change in culture. So I don't know, we'll stay tuned. But I would also say that I probably work just as hard now than when I was billing 2,100 hours at a law firm, but I have a little more balance in my life. And I think that makes me better at what I do. And it makes me just generally happier. And hopefully my family likes it too. But anyway,
having some control over your schedule is just an element of freedom that's empowering. And if you have the ability to exert some control over when and where you do things, you're probably going to be happier. Agreed.
And if you're lucky enough to be in a situation where you can have control over your schedule.
Right. A lot of people don't.
A lot of people don't. And I feel like that needs to be said. But I also wanted to touch for a minute on COVID and the difference that COVID has made in the life-work balance paradigm. I think I don't know what your thoughts are, but in the beginning, it's almost like when I was able to travel, when you were able to commute, when you're able to have some time in the office, part of the balance was the time away, that you had focused, complete work time to balance off against sort of the flexible time or the only family time. And then COVID comes, and all of a sudden you're home and everybody's home and the kids are home and you're home and your wife's home and nobody's leaving and there's still work. And so question about how that worked out for you in terms of balance. Do you feel like did things shift too much to the family side for a little while? Were you comfortable with that? You think it threw things off? Or do you think that you were able to keep the balance going?
I think I was largely able to keep the balance going, but it was because of the people around me. My wife is a small business owner, and her business was closed. It's actually still closed in New York. And so she had more free time than she would normally have had. Mm-hmm. My kids are 11 and 8, so they're a little bit more self-sufficient. I can't imagine what it would be like for a single parent having to, do these virtual classes, this virtual learning, which I think was largely a failure in our school district anyway. I mean, I think they tried to do the best they could, but it's just really hard to replicate in-person instruction for an elementary school student. So I was very fortunate. I had I had more, I think, more support than a lot of people do. But honestly, the prospect of going into another school year with a large, at-home virtual component to it, which is, I think, where we're headed, is at least some sort of hybrid model. That's
Yeah,
pretty
mostly.
daunting. That's pretty
Yeah.
daunting. I mean, we're not really that well equipped to teach our children in the way that they need to be taught. The socialization is really hard to replicate. I've seen that with our kids, that it was a little bit of a challenge, kind of reconnecting with friends and being, like socializing again. So yeah, I mean, it was challenging. I was fortunate. How did it feel for you?
Um, and I have kids that are older. So I think definitely people who have younger kids, it's going to be a completely different experience, because during the day, during calls, during times when things are happening, you're also having to assist with online learning. But I didn't have to do any of
Right.
that. My husband was also, working on trying to adjust to being in an office 5 days a week and being in an environment where everybody's very much there and working, to switching to remote work. And so I would say for the first month, it didn't feel like I was actually able, in a weird way, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was able to give work what I wanted to give work. Whereas the challenge has traditionally been on the other side, where I feel like I'm not able to give my family what I want to give my family. And so it was just I raise it because it was a really interesting feeling that I hadn't had in a really long time, or probably ever,
Right.
where I was like, oh gosh, I'm feeling like this work thing isn't getting taken care of, as opposed to feeling like my home thing wasn't getting taken care of. But like anything else, I think we are adaptive creatures. And after about a month, maybe 2 months, it began to feel weirdly normal, and everything sort of began to fall into place in terms of finding a balance and making sure that we all were able, like in my house, were able to carve out time during the day where we were doing our work or our school or the things that needed to be done. But it just goes back to another interesting phenomena that I've had sort of the whole time I've been working, where I feel like, and I asked you this, I went back before to ask you this, of like, when did you know that you needed to make a change? And it goes to the question that I ask myself a lot, like, how often do you check in with yourself about where the balance is? Was it because maybe before you had this major change where it was kind of forced on you, even on the 8 a.m. Sunday call, you weren't thinking, that's not really what I want to be doing. But then after
Yeah.
that, do you have like a regular thing where you feel like you check in with yourself and say, how's this going? Like, is it a conscious thought in your head, or has it just become your life and you're grateful for it?
It's a good question. And just to be clear, even when I was doing those Sunday morning calls, I never enjoyed
Well,
that.
I wasn't suggesting that you were like, oh my God,
Like,
amazing.
I mean,
Another 8 a.m. Sunday.
I thought it was fucked up when I was doing them, but you're right. But like I said before, it didn't actually force change for me. I don't know how often I really reflect on it. I think I would notice it if I wasn't able to, I just, look, there's only so many hours you have in a day, but I feel like the test for me is as, the kids' sports start kicking in again. Hopefully we'll
If
have fall sprite if they do. But my daughter's soccer has started again. But it's like controlled environment, no games, that kind of thing. But even that has been good, because it's like, oh yeah, I need to make time to take her to practice. And I really enjoy watching her play and watching my son play sports. So when those kick in again, at some point, am I making the time for it? We went away for a couple of weeks in June, and the first week I really didn't do much work at all. I mean, I kind of kept up with emails, but I really didn't do anything particularly substantive. The second week I was more engaged, and it was sort of my regular schedule, but it was still nice to do it in a different location. So I guess even though I'm not necessarily regularly, checking in and kind of assessing how things are going. If I'm able to do the things with my family that I enjoy doing while still performing my job, hopefully at a high level, um, then I'm content. So it's just the way my day-to-day flow has progressed. But I still should probably reflect on it a little bit more specifically, more frequently, but I don't do it that often. Do you? Is
Yeah.
that something you're like conscious of that?
I feel like I'm conscious of it in an unconscious way, if that makes sense. Like, I think like you, like when things are going along, I don't think about it too much. I think there are times when the balance gets thrown off, like in the beginning of COVID, where weirdly I thought, "Ooh, I don't know if I'm focusing on work enough." And that may also be like my own thing where I just always feel like I'm never doing enough in anything. But that's a whole other conversation. But I think that I don't think about it regularly unless the balance is off. And weirdly, when the balance gets off on the work side of things, I don't know if I have a good enough mechanism to check myself. But I generally think I do a pretty good job, which brings me to another question I have, which is, do you think what are the things for you, and maybe this is a pre-COVID thing, I don't know how it's going to be going forward, but what are the things for you that when you're tempted to let the balance go, like, are there things that you find that suck you into the work world that begin to pull you away from your family life, whether they're intentional or unintentional? Have you identified what those things are, or does it happen in a way that you don't even realize it's happening?
It's usually, I mentioned before that a big part of my job is working with our subsidiaries, and that could be on things like product development and go-to-market strategy.
Right.
It could be on personnel matters. It could be on PR, which is my background. It could be on policy initiatives. It really runs the gamut. But because of that, they're all operating independently, and I'm sort of the thread between them. But they're not considering, well, I have a new product. Company A has a new product coming out, and Company B has a new product coming out. When they all kind of come together, and it's like confluence of time-consuming things going on, that's when work just takes over a lot more of my time.
But that's okay, right? I mean, there are going to be
Absolutely.
times where you're going to
Yeah,
be like, something big's going to be happening. Like for me, it's
absolutely.
some
No, I
big.
mean, I love it. I mean, I love that we always have a lot going on. There's never a day where I wake up and I'm like, what am I going to do today? And
Right.
it keeps it fresh and exciting and interesting. It's what I love about this job. But it does throw your work life, equation out of balance at times. But again, I'm fine with, because when I'm working with my colleagues and we're like the feeling of accomplishment when the prime broker thing is a good example. The prime with the Genesis, they acquired this company. It's a lot of work, a lot of moving parts to get everybody aligned. Think about from like an operations, legal, technical, lots of different considerations there. I love that. That's the fun part about building businesses, like getting to work with people and drive these initiatives forward. And so like what we never do, and I'm really grateful for, is there's never just like, we're going to have a meeting because it's the Friday of a 3-day holiday weekend and I want you to show how committed you are. Like that just doesn't happen. If we're doing things over the weekend, it's because we need to get them done. So there's it's just a different culture. I mean, it's a culture where people are working hard and all very much trying to, have all lined up their goals and are trying to work towards their goals. That's what's great about building businesses. It's when you feel like FaceTime is required, you have to be here, you have to demonstrate your commitment. That's
Right.
the stuff that is just exhausting and counterproductive.
Agreed. I would say that it's the same thing. And I think there was a saying, I don't know where it came from, but that you can have it all, just not at the same time. that was about life-work balance. That was very common when I was beginning to think about leaving my first job, that you can have it all, just not at the same time. And I think about that a lot now. And I think, well, what does having it all mean, right? Like, is it having it all, but not at the same time means you can have it all. You can have a career, that's the all, or you can have a great home life, that's the all, but maybe not all of it at the same time. But for me, I think I've redefined my all. Like my all is having sort of less of a wall between everything and more of like it's a more fluid situation, and the all is having the balance. Like the all is the thing. So I don't know. I think that I think it's good. And I'm always trying to think of ways to make the reality that we have be more of the normal going forward in the workplace. And I mean, at Coin Center, we're incredibly fortunate to have an amazing team. We moved to a 4-day work week about a year ago, and we try to maintain our Fridays. But at the same time, if there's something happening, we're obviously working 24 hours on whatever it is. And so, I mean, I think overall it's been a pretty good success. One thing I've been thinking a lot about is like, now how do we go forward with COVID? Like, doesn't seem like things are going back to any kind of regular schedule anytime soon. It doesn't feel like we're going to be back in the office 4 days a week, or I'm going to be doing meetings on Capitol Hill, or you're going to be commuting to work anytime soon. So, I mean, I guess in terms of life-work balance, it's pretty good, but do you begin to worry about the culture, the culture and the cohesiveness of your team and of your relationships, and that you have in the media and other areas where you need to have a little more contact with people on a regular basis to keep a conversation going? Do you worry about that in these times?
Yeah, I do. And, I think the sort of preconceived notion I had about working remotely, I wasn't opposed to working remotely, by the way, but I didn't think it would be something that we could do for 4 months straight, right? And obviously we still have some ahead of us. I think my belief about productivity was just wrong, but my belief around the benefits of socializing ideas, connecting with people one-on-one, selfishly for my job, a big part of it is I'll be walking past one of the teams and it'll like trigger in my mind, oh, I haven't caught up with so-and-so in a while. Particularly more of like the mid-level people who don't necessarily have the day-to-day exposure to the DCG team. And I want them to feel I want them to feel that connection. Because they're all playing crucial roles, but your day-to-day might not have you interfacing with Barry or me or some of the other DCG folks. Mm-hmm. I do think we missed that a bit. And you have to be really intentional about meeting with people, right? It has to be, you're thinking about somebody, you shoot them a note and say, can we set up a Zoom? You miss sort of the ad hoc day-to-day flow of the office conversations. For people outside the company, relationships, because everybody is in the same boat, I worry about it less. I've still managed to talk to a lot of colleagues, peers, portfolio companies, reporters, whoever, during COVID, but it just requires a little bit more work. You have to actually think about doing it. Right. But I do wonder what the state of work is going to look like going forward. And it's, there's some days I think I don't ever want to be on the Long Island Railroad again, or at least not without a vaccine. But I think being in New York City, it's invigorating. It's exciting to be in New York. I moved to New York 20 plus years ago, and it wasn't to sit in my house on Long Island and not interact with people. I like being in a city. So I think we're all going to have some pretty significant changes to that we don't even foresee yet. I know a lot of people you read a lot about sort of people moving to suburban or exurban areas and office space leaving the city. And I think some of that is true and will happen. But it's hard for me to imagine New York City being something where people don't want to go to. It's like eventually, I think people are going to want to go back into the city. But it is strange. It's very weird to think about. Like the day-to-day, getting on the subway, getting on the train. I'm definitely more reluctant to do that. I don't think I'm alone in that feeling. I know it's pretty widespread. And
Right.
and the other thing that's crazy is this, in New York, we thought we had the numbers down, and they have been lower, but when you see these flare-ups throughout the country, are we ever going to, like, it's hard to see a light at the end of the tunnel. It really is.
Yeah. I mean, it's particularly looking at New York, and the numbers are good, but all the things that can't reopen. I mean, I think today is the first day of phase 4, but a few of the things that were supposed to be in phase 4 are not, like, dining, and they shouldn't be dining in restaurants and other things. Well, I don't know if I should say they shouldn't be, but probably makes sense. But Broadway.
There's some inconsistencies in what's open and what isn't, but everyone's trying to do their best. I know these are hard decisions to make.
Yeah.
And we're having them too. I mean, the woman, my colleague Jen, who runs operations for us, she's fantastic, and she is in constant conversations with other people, similarly situated in the city, and everybody's just trying to figure it out. I mean, there hasn't been much, if any, national guidance about reopening, and same with schools. I mean, you're probably in the same boat where we're just waiting to hear what's going to happen in the fall with schools, but like, it's really hard to know the right path forward.
It really is. Well, that is actually like a tangent on a tangent on a tangent, going back to the title of our podcast.
Right.
But I think that might be wrapping up our time. But I really, Mark, wanted to thank you so much for sharing your story, and for also just being such a great partner to work with all the time. We really appreciate everybody at DCG. And I am very thankful that through the crypto world, I've gotten to know you better as a friend, and that we shared this idea. And I would love to have you on to talk about so many other things in the future. But in the meantime, have a great dog walk and a good lunch.
Well, just before we sign off, just thank you to you and the team. You guys are fantastic advocates for the industry. And it's really fun to get a chance to work with you. So I'm looking forward to continuing to do so over the next couple of years.
Same. Thank you so much. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.